Welcome to Bonding, an educational kinky podcast hosted by Sub in the City. I'm Sarah Salazar and I'm an integrative kink therapist, coach and educator, not to mention a proudly collared submissive with 15 years of experience on the BDSM scene. I'm in a 24/7 Dom-Sub dynamic with my husband and pro-Dom, Master Carlos, and in this podcast, you'll hear us talk about all things kink, BDSM and power exchange. So whether you're a curious newbie or a long-standing member of the community, welcome Kinksters. We're looking forward to bonding with you. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Bonding. I am so excited to bring you the second episode of the third season, and we are continuing with the topic of DOMs at the moment. And today's episode is, what the fuck is a pleasure dom anyway, and why are there so many of them? So I am jumping on this bandwagon after hearing a few other people in this space talking about the concept of a pleasure dom, which has become somewhat of a trend at the moment and a bit of a buzzword. Pleasure doms seem to be everywhere. It seems to be the default title many people, particularly new or exploring doms, seem to label themselves with. But I would love to dive deep into this concept of pleasure domming because, in all honesty, it feels a little phony. And by phony, I don't necessarily mean malicious in any way. And I want to preface this by saying, if you truly feel aligned with the role of pleasure dom, then no shade to you. I just think that from what I'm seeing out there right now, it's a pretty bleh title that people are giving themselves because they don't really know how to define their dominance. Or they're scared to step into their authentic dominance, and the title of pleasure dom feels palatable and approachable. However, I'm going to break it to you. In my opinion, it seems bland, and if you're trying to be everyone's cup of tea, that's exactly what you'll be. Bland. Because what does being a pleasure dom even mean? Okay, I saw this being discussed in a clip from a podcast with Justine Cross, and I didn't listen to the whole thing. But I was like, yes, say it louder for the people in the back, please. Because from my point of view, all doms are pleasure doms. Why? Because if you're not dominating someone for pleasure, their pleasure, your pleasure, whatever, then what exactly are you doing it for? You're not doing it to genuinely hurt someone or control someone, because if you were, newsflash, that's called abuse. And there's a label for that type of person. It's called a narcissist. Wherever you are on the spectrum of power play and DS, whether pleasure is your main focus, or whether you're exploring things like pain, humiliation, degradation, edge play, fear play, ultimately it's all for pleasure. Whether you choose to do so with a strict tone or a romantic tone is also neither here nor there, because you're also doing it for pleasure. To define one form of dominance as pleasurable means you believe the other is not pleasurable. And while that may be true for you, that doesn't mean that it's true for everyone. So sure, pleasure is very much subjective in this case. And in fact, I even went as far as to ask AI what the definition of a pleasure dom was, and I got the following. A pleasure dom, short for pleasure-focused dominant, is a person in BDSM or power exchange dynamics who takes the dominant role while prioritizing their partner's pleasure, enjoyment, and satisfaction. Is that not what all doms should be doing? It goes on to say, unlike stereotypes that portray dominance as being primarily about control, pain, or discipline, a pleasure dom often focuses on giving physical pleasure, such as through touch, massage, or consensual sexual activities, creating emotional enjoyment and intimacy, using dominance as a way to guide or direct pleasurable experiences, paying close attention to their partner's responses and comfort. Again, is this not what all doms should be doing? Am I missing something here? This is not exclusive to so-called pleasure doms. You know, you can be the biggest sadist in the world, and I would expect you to still be paying close attention to your partner's responses and comfort. You know, all of those points that I've just mentioned should be things that all doms are doing, no matter how you identify or label your dominance. It goes on to say, a pleasure dom may still enjoy authority, control, or giving instructions, but the goal is often to enhance the submissive partner's experience rather than emphasize punishment or endurance. As with any BDSM dynamic, healthy pleasure dom-sub relationships are based on explicit consent, clear communication, negotiated boundaries, respect for safe words, or other agreed upon ways to pause or stop. So again, all things that all DOMs should be doing. That one sentence about not emphasizing punishment or endurance, I totally get. That is legit, right? You don't have to be a dom that is emphasizing punishment and endurance. That might not be part of your dynamic, and that's okay. But I still think the rest of it is something that all doms should be doing, and this is not exclusive to people who call themselves a pleasure dom. And I'll tell you why I think that's a little bit dangerous as well in a moment. What I think is happening with what I personally see as an excessive rise of the use of the term pleasure dom is one of two things. The first is very simple. These pleasure doms are what we might also see referred to as soft doms or sensual doms, which essentially means they're not going to be doing anything on the extreme or hard end of BDSM that involves pain or edge play. And again, extreme is totally subjective here. And that's fair enough. If you genuinely don't like those things, they're not your kink, then cool, you do you. I am not kink shaming soft or sensual doms. They absolutely have their place in the DS universe. And if your preferred title for this type of doming is pleasure dom, then great. I have no qualms with that. However, I do have a couple of other theories that are a little more disingenuous when it comes to this pleasure dom label. For one, I think some doms are using this title that is palatable and attractive to newbie subs particularly, which could cause some tricky or troubling experiences if the dom in question does not have genuine intentions. And I know that could be the same for any type of dom, right? And this is not to scare anyone or say that all pleasure doms are a red flag. I just think it's important to be aware of when this title is getting thrown around pretty flippantly these days. I mean, even in my early days as a sub, I don't think I would be attracted to someone who called themselves a pleasure dom because I'm a masochist and I do like pain. But still, on the surface, they may come across as someone who is more gentle and kind and willing to support you, which can make them stand out from others, especially when you're new. But guess what? All doms should be kind and gentle and willing to support you, even if they identify as a complete sadist. If they are a good dom, that is what they will do. I don't want to go on about this theory too long because we cannot blanket label all pleasure doms as bad, and this isn't about cancelling pleasure doms. It's just something to be mindful of when doing your usual vetting when meeting people. It's kind of the same as, don't let someone completely inexperienced put you off. When someone says, I have no limits, it often means they don't know the limits yet. So if you can pause and be curious, you can separate the assholes who genuinely don't believe in limits from the ones who just don't know yet. And I believe we need to have the same process with pleasure doms, right? Get curious. Ask them what the term pleasure dom means to them, why they identify that way, and it will likely give you more insight into their intentions with it. But this is something that you should be doing with vetting anyway, right? Just because one person is a sub and the other person is a dom doesn't make them automatically compatible. So it's important to dive into that question of what does dominance mean or look like for you? And what does submission mean and look like for you and for me, to make sure that you're both on the same page. The second half of this theory, I'd say, is a little bit more detrimental to both dom and sub. And that's the possibility of a pleasure dom being the people pleaser type. And you will have heard me touch on people pleasers in previous episodes. This can come up a lot in kink and when we're exploring our desires with other people. So I've had discussions with a few different people about this topic, and the answer I've heard from some pleasure doms is that it's defined in this way because their dominance is solely about giving the other person pleasure, and that they receive their pleasure by giving pleasure and seeing the submissive enjoying themselves. Now, I'm not disputing this either. This is legit. This is absolutely a thing. But again, that is a pretty common thing for most DOMs to enjoy their submissive getting pleasure from the dynamic. All DOMs enjoy that their submissives are enjoying it. But when I hear that that is the only thing a DOM can possibly think of that they are getting from the dynamic, and that is the only thing that brings them pleasure, I start to wonder about their true desires and intentions with domming. And again, it's not that this is shady or not legit. It's just that to me, if you're only domming someone because the other person wants it and you don't really take anything from it, that is to me what we'd call service topping or service domming. There's something about this that almost has a bit of a switchy, subby feel to it because it's about serving the other person, okay? And there's nothing in it to do with their own desires. It's purely about giving for the intention of the other person receiving. And again, nothing wrong with service topping, but if you're trying to disguise service topping as a genuine individual desire by calling it pleasure domming, then this starts to cross the line into being a little bit manipulative. And this is where the people-pleasing can come in. People-pleasing is something that I work on a lot with clients in therapy. And I've worked on my own forms of people-pleasing over the years, so I'm not afraid to tell you that people-pleasing is not this nice, selfless thing. It can become extremely manipulative and ultimately has nothing to do with making the other person happy and actually has everything to do with you avoiding the uncomfortability of potentially disappointing, letting down, or simply not being able to please your partner in the way that they desire. And I'm talking about this in the context of domming in general or using the term pleasure dom. So I want you to ask yourself, who are you doing it for and why? Is it that you genuinely enjoy being dominant, or are you just doing it to please them? In addition, is the term that you're using, pleasure dom, a way to perhaps soften your desires and make them more palatable for your partner? Are you afraid of what they might think of you if you called yourself something else or expressed particular kinks or fetishes that you have? The list of dominant archetypes and subtypes is so vast, so it almost feels a little bit lazy to default to calling yourself a pleasure dom. Instead, why not take some time to do some research and some self-inquiry to understand what you like and how best to articulate that? But also, on the flip side, labels are not the be-all and end-all. And I often find it isn't helpful to stuff yourself into one kinky box. So simply identifying as dominant can be enough if you're still exploring or figuring out your dominant style, or whether your dominant style evolves and changes with different people, for example. We don't have to stay the same all the time. This will also help you to sit with your intentions. And I challenge you to ask yourself, what do I get out of being dominant besides my partner's pleasure? Do you enjoy the control, the power, the vulnerability you're entrusted with, the privilege you feel to be put in a position where you could really take advantage, but you don't? You act with care and respect. These feelings are all valid in power exchange. If you find it hard to answer this question, then perhaps there is an element that you're kind of doing this to adapt and please your partner. Because you should both be able to take something individually from your experiences. This is a co-creation after all. And I've seen it so often that people really struggle to come up with other reasons why they like domming other than that their partner likes it. But if you're still certain that the term pleasure dom feels like the right title for you, then here's some reflection questions to help you get even more clear on what pleasure domming means to you. What does pleasure mean and look like to me? What does pleasure mean and look like to my submissive or my potential partner? How do I use pleasure as a form of power in our dynamic? How do I want to feel when I am in my dominant energy? What happens when our definition or idea of pleasure is different? How do we navigate that? These questions will help you come back to yourself, come back to your own individual intentions, taking the focus off of what you feel you should be providing for your submissive and allowing you to just check in with yourself. If this has piqued your interest, and if you're curious to dive deeper into your own dominant identity and find a style that feels authentic and natural to you, then we are enrolling now for our 8-week mentorship, Embodying Authentic Dominance, starting in September. This is a hybrid mentorship with online masterclasses and in-person workshops, as well as one-to-one coaching and real-life hands-on training with a submissive, to enable you to approach your dominance holistically. This is not your standard workshop. This is a personal journey that will actually leave you feeling fully equipped to not just dom someone with confidence, but actually feel clarity and acceptance around your own individual desires. We're only taking on 12 students to ensure that you get our undivided attention. That's me, Master Carlos, our pro subs, and some guest facilitators along the way. Applications are open now, so check the link in the show notes for all the details. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at my email or on my DMs on Instagram. And let me know. I want to know, what do you think about this whole rise in pleasure doms? Do you think it's a little bit phony? Do you think it's okay? Where do you sit? And it'll be interesting to hear from doms and subs on this, because I have been hearing that pleasure dom is kind of like the new fake dom. Maybe that's a little bit extreme, so we won't get into that now. But yeah, I'm curious to know. So head over to Instagram, drop me a comment on my post, and I'd love to hear from you. And I will see you all in the next episode. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for listening, Kinksters. It's been wonderful bonding with you. And if you enjoyed this podcast episode, don't forget to like and share it with your friends. And if you're ready to explore your kinks further, head on over to subinthecity.com for more content and offerings.